after I paid off his $72,000 debt. I discovered he'd been secretly funding his ex-wife's boutique with my money while calling me Plan B in group chats. He bet his friends I'd stay because I was too insecure to leave. When I finally walked, he posted my nudes, got me fired, then messaged, "Now you've got nothing," until I went to his job with a flash drive and it was 6:13 a.m. when I saw it. A text from an unknown number. I thought it was spam until I saw my name in the first line. "You don't know me, but you deserve the truth before I disappear too." Attached were 47 screenshots. The first one was my husband's name, Ethan. At the top of a text thread, he was talking to her, a woman named Marissa, and my stomach dropped reading how casually he talked about me. He called me his financial plan. He called her his real home. I scrolled through message after message of him mocking my panic attacks, joking about how I'd probably faint if he ever actually told me the truth. He said I was so desperate to be loved that he didn't even need to try anymore. He even bragged about how I paid the mortgage, utilities, car note, everything. Then came the part that made me shake, so hard my phone nearly slipped from my hand. "Want to bet on when she finally cracks?" I say by Christmas. I didn't even realize I'd started crying until my phone buzzed again. One last message from Marissa. "I thought I was special too. He told me he was leaving you. He didn't. He used me for money too. You should know before he ruins someone else. I'm gone for good." I sat there in bed, staring at the wall, the morning light slowly creeping across the room like nothing had changed. When Ethan came home that evening, I showed him everything, the screenshots, the messages, the proof. He didn't even blink, just looked at me, smirked and said, "She's just mad I didn't pick her either." Then he turned back to the TV, cracking open a beer, like I wasn't standing there holding the corpse of our marriage in my hands. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Not loud, not messy, just a clean break. Like a rope that's been strained too long finally giving out. I didn't yell. I didn't cry anymore. I just walked to my office, opened my laptop, and started building something that would ruin him completely. A Dropbox folder. It had a title that would make anyone curious. How Ethan Morgan Makes His Living. And soon, everyone he owed money to, his business partners, his friends, his boss, his parents, would open it. Because I had everything. The screenshots, the bank statements, the lies, even the recordings he didn't know I had. When I hit upload, I whispered to myself. Not angry, not crying, just calm. "You wanted to bet on when I'd crack, Ethan? You just lost." And that was only the beginning. We met in the summer of 2012 at a bar in Columbus, Ohio. Some dive near the short north where Ethan was charming enough to make a room lean in when he talked. He had a job title that sounded impressive, which mattered to me back then because I just moved into my first real apartment and anything that smelled like stability felt like oxygen. I was 26, anxious as hell, still learning to breathe through panic attacks. He was 30, polished, and when he smiled he made me feel like the only person in a crowded room. That's how it always starts, with the illusion of being chosen. We moved in together 6 months later. We married 2 years after that. I remember the wedding like a smudged Polaroid. Pretty, public, all the parts arranged so everyone thought we were fine. Private life was a different thing. I worked as a paralegal. My paychecks were steady. His consulting gigs were sporadic but lucrative on paper, or so he told me. He loved talking about future plans, a house, a second car, travel, investments. I handled the numbers because I liked control. I liked certainty. He liked the image of success. At home, he was warm when he chose to be. In the small hours, he could be the only person on earth I wanted to laugh with. But the thing about panic attacks is they make you feel unworthy of the calm you get. He knew that. He used it. I used to think people who gaslit you were monsters you'd read about online. It's not theatrical. It's slow and tiny. A look that says you're overreacting, a joke about your sensitivity, a text shrugged off as humor. Over time, those little things stack until you don't trust your own feelings. Ethan did it with the kind of ease you practice for. He mocked my panic attacks in front of friends, so it became a joke everyone accepted. He praised my ability to keep the household afloat like it was an admirable burden I'd chosen. He told me I was practical and grounding, and that he was the visionary. It's flattering when someone puts you in a box called reliable, especially when you'd spent years feeling broken. Financially, I was the backbone. I paid the mortgage, the utilities, most of the car, our groceries. Ethan handled work expenses that always needed paying immediately and opportunities that required loans I could front. I didn't like saying no. He made me feel like saying yes was part of being on a team. Besides, we were buying a house in Clintonville that needed work. I told myself loans and shared liability were part of building something together. There were red flags, receipts that didn't add up, requests for cash at odd times, emails from vendors with complaints I'd never seen. He'd write off angry messages as miscommunications or harsh clients. Once, I found a voicemail from a woman thanking him for the weekend, but when I confronted him, he called me paranoid. "You always read too much into nothing," he said. The worst part was I believed him because believing otherwise meant admitting I'd been living a lie. Admitting that felt worse than any small humiliation. We argued less and less about small things and more about money and my neediness. He started staying late at work more often. He stopped telling me about projects. When I pushed for details, he called me controlling. That word, controlling, is a trap. It's a convenient label for someone who wants to avoid accountability. 2 years ago, I found a folder on our shared drive labeled Ethan_payments_2019 and opened it. It was full of spreadsheets, invoices, transfers, IOUs. I didn't understand half of it, so I closed it and told myself I'd look later. I never did. I thought I could trust him. I thought love meant trusting. Now, after the text from Marissa and the screenshots, that folder suddenly mattered. I went to my laptop that night, hands that used to tremble with panic now steady with a kind of sharp, quiet focus. I opened the file again. There were names in there I recognized, vendors, 2 numbers I knew were connected to his consultant partner, and at the bottom, a list titled settlements with amounts and dates. The line items didn't look like normal business expenses. Some were labeled with nicknames he used for friends. Some were plain as day. Loan, personal, repayment I scrolled to the end and found one entry that stopped my breath. It wasn't money owed to a friend. It was labeled Marissa, escrow, and the amount made my throat close. I stared at that number and every half answer he'd ever given me about work cash flow came rushing back. Then I realized the folder was only the beginning. There was another folder inside, hidden. I hovered over it with the cursor and my heart was a low, steady drum. I clicked, and the screen filled with a PDF that looked like a contract, and a name I had never expected to find there. The file was labeled Private Agreement _2021 PDF. I opened it expecting another invoice or fake business document. But the first page started with a header from a local private lending group, one I'd heard Ethan mention a few times, always in vague tones about potential investors. Except this wasn't a pitch. It was an agreement. It listed Ethan Morgan as the borrower. The lender's signature was from a man named Victor Hale, someone I'd never met but whose name sounded like it belonged on a courtroom docket. The loan amount was $85,000, supposedly for business expansion. The collateral? Our house. My name was forged on the document. I remember staring at the screen, reading my own signature written in a style that looked almost right. My heart went cold. I checked the date 9 months after we refinanced. I'd never seen it before. I scrolled down and the last page had a second clause, one that made everything make sense. Borrower acknowledges secondary partnership with M. Monroe in executing collateral terms. Monroe. Marissa. He'd borrowed money against our house with his mistress. I felt sick. Every fight about finances, every bad quarter excuse, every time he told me I didn't understand the business world, it all connected. He wasn't just using me emotionally. He was bleeding me dry. I didn't sleep that night. I kept scrolling through the folder, uncovering things I should have seen years ago. Ethan had borrowed from almost everyone. Colleagues, relatives, even his best friend, Tyler, who'd helped us with the down payment. He'd promised to double the return in 6 months. Instead, the money was gone. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I went through our joint account history, and that's when I saw the small transactions. $200 here, $150 there, all labeled under vague business names. But the account numbers tied to prepaid cards, not companies. He'd been siphoning money slowly, methodically. At 10:47 a.m., he texted me, "You okay? You seemed off last night." I didn't answer. He followed it up with, "Don't spiral. You always think the worst." The irony made me laugh out loud. One of those hollow laughs that feels more like choking. By afternoon, I drove to his office, or what I thought was his office. The address from his invoices led me to a co-working space. I asked the receptionist if Ethan Morgan still rented there. She frowned. "He hasn't been here in months," she said. "He moved out. Left a bunch of mail we had to toss." That's when I knew every piece of his consulting business was fake. He came home that night cheerful, like nothing was wrong. I watched him open a beer, flop onto the couch, and talk about sports while I sat at the dining table pretending to look at my phone. My hands were still shaking, but inside I felt something solid. Not fear, not rage, just a calm, grounded resolve. I wasn't the weak one anymore. When he went to bed, I stayed up, logged into the home Wi-Fi router, and saw every device connected. One caught my eye, an iPad he'd hidden, registered under his initials. It was still active. I followed the IP address trail, logged into the synced email account using the password he once bragged was unhackable. His mother's birthday and the word king. And there it was. A string of emails with attachments, recordings, audio files labeled calls. Marissa_4, Tyler_, meeting of 3. The first one I clicked on was only 30 seconds long. It was Ethan's voice, low and steady, saying, "She'll never leave. She's too scared of being alone. I could drain her dry and she'd still think we're a team." That's when I knew the Dropbox wasn't just revenge anymore. It was evidence. I backed everything up. Every screenshot, every contract, every recording. But as I built the folder, one name kept showing up in places it shouldn't. Tyler. His best friend. The one who loaned us money. The one who texted me after Ethan's outbursts to check in. There was something in the emails connecting them. Transfers, receipts, and one subject line that made me freeze. "She's almost ready to sell." Sell what? Me? The house? The illusion? I didn't know yet. But that was the night I realized Ethan hadn't acted alone. And the next day I found out just how deep it really went. It was 8 a.m. the next morning when I decided to call Tyler. I'd known him as Ethan's best friend since before our wedding. The guy who always smiled too big and gave me the "you're lucky to have him" speech at parties. He and his wife had come over for dinners, birthdays, backyard barbecues. He'd always been nice to me, maybe too nice. When he answered, his tone was chipper at first. "Hey, long time no talk." Until I said, "We need to talk. About Ethan. And money." There was a pause. Then a sigh. "Okay," he said quietly. "Where are you?" We met at a diner off High Street. He looked nervous. The kind of nervous that doesn't come from guilt, but from fear of being found out. His leg bounced under the table. I laid out the printouts, the forged documents, the bank transfers, the screenshots. I watched his face drain of color. Finally, he said, "He wasn't supposed to go that far." That line froze me. "What do you mean, that far?" Tyler rubbed his temples, looked around like someone might be listening. Then he told me everything. Ethan had been running a fake investment loop for nearly 3 years, promising returns to friends and small business owners, paying old debts with new money. It wasn't a company. It was a scam. Tyler had helped him set it up originally. Under the illusion it was a bridge fund. They'd used Tyler's LLC to funnel the money, keeping it separate from Ethan's personal accounts. But he started changing the numbers, Tyler said, his voice shaking. "I told him to slow down. He said he'd fix it. Then he forged your signature. That wasn't part of it. I swear." He looked at me, desperate, as if I'd give him absolution. But I just stared at my coffee, because something else was clicking in my head. Marissa, the escrow loan. The comment about, "She's almost ready to sell." "Tyler," I said slowly. "What did he mean by that?" Tyler looked up, wide-eyed, and didn't answer. So I pushed. Sell what? He hesitated, then whispered, You. The room went quiet. My pulse pounded in my ears. He explained that Ethan had been talking about selling your share of the house once he convinced me to refinance again, using my credit score and salary to secure another loan. He planned to fake a breakdown, get sympathy from me, and then persuade me to sign over financial control under the guise of protecting his mental health. Once that happened, he'd transfer the title and default on everything. Tyler said he didn't think Ethan would actually do it. He's cruel, but he's not stupid, he said. He was supposed to pay everyone back before it blew up, but Ethan wasn't paying anyone back. He was funneling the cash through accounts that led to Marissa, and, according to the files, at least one more woman. I sat there in that diner, staring at the man who had helped destroy my life, and realized this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about survival. Tyler tried to justify himself. He said you'd be fine. You've got your job, your family. He said, Don't, I said sharply. Don't finish that sentence. He shut up. I left the diner, went straight to my car, locked the doors, and screamed until my throat burned. When the shaking stopped, I took out my phone and scrolled through the Dropbox folder I'd built. It wasn't enough anymore. I needed something that would destroy Ethan completely. Not just his money, not just his lies, but the network that made him feel untouchable. That's when I realized something. Every single loan, contract, and account was still active, all under his name, all traceable. So I did what any weak, anxious wife would never be expected to do. I started moving the pieces around. Quietly, legally, meticulously. I created a second Dropbox, this one encrypted, and titled it Operation Bet Lost. And when I opened Ethan's iPad again that night, I found something even worse. A folder I hadn't seen before. One labeled Failsafe. Inside were screenshots of me, texts, emails, notes I'd written during panic attacks, recordings of my crying. He'd been documenting everything, twisting it into a narrative of instability. He'd been building a case to paint me as mentally unfit. He wasn't just planning to steal my money. He was planning to erase me. And that's when I stopped being scared. I started planning his fall. After Tyler left the diner, everything tightened into a single machine in my head. There was no drama, no theatrical vows to get even, just a terrible, efficient calm. The kind that arrives when you realize the only person who'll save you is yourself. I'm not naive. I knew what I could do and what I couldn't. I also knew Ethan's arrogance. He'd never believe I'd fight back the way he deserved. The first rule I gave myself was, nothing impulsive. A real takedown isn't a scream in the night. It's paperwork, patience, and leverage. I closed the kitchen light and turned on every lamp in the house the way people do when they want to stay awake and steady. I made a list on a legal pad like an old-school mob ledger. Evidence, targets, distribution, safety nets. Evidence. I copied everything into 2 encrypted drives. Screenshots, audio recordings, forged contracts, bank transfers, emails, the whole ugly collage. I labeled things plainly: loans, forged docs, Marissa_convos, Tyler_receipts, failsafe. I didn't invent anything. I simply put his life into files in a way other people could read and understand. Targets. Not just creditors. People. The ones who'd loaned him money, the vendor owners, the landlord of his fake office, the small business association contact who'd once complimented his networking smarts. If you want to take a conman down, you don't just attack his cash flow. You expose the map of who enabled him, knowingly or not. That hurts more. It ruins reputations. It isolates. Distribution. I decided on a method that guaranteed circulation but minimized my trace. I created an account that used an old email of mine we hadn't used in years, the one from law school, and set up a Dropbox folder named almost innocently Ethan Morgan _financial records _2021-2024. I uploaded everything, but I didn't blast it. I sent targeted, contextualized messages to people in his life. Short, plain, and surgical. A copy to the small business owner who'd wired him $10,000 with the subject line, "You should see this." Another to Tyler with just one file, the forged mortgage page, and nothing else. To the accountant who'd filed his quarterly taxes, a folder named Audit Ethan Morgan. I didn't include a manifesto. I didn't taunt. I let the documents speak. If someone opened a single PDF, the loan agreement with my forged signature, it was enough. Safety nets. I made sure there were copies in 2 places outside the house. An encrypted email to my sister with a password she could use if something happened to me. A sealed envelope with hard copies at my mother's house. I also printed timestamps and notarized a few things at an office supply store. Not to start a legal battle then, but to show I wasn't messing around. I rehearsed what I would say when people called. Calm, factual, no accusations without the files. If a vendor asked for context, I'd reply, please check the folder. People hate being lied to. They love receipts. Once receipts are in front of them, they call banks. Banks call lawyers. Lawyers call subpoenas. It becomes a machine. I won't lie, there were moments I felt sick. I pictured Ethan's smirk like a bruise across my day. I pictured Marissa's text and the coldness in it. You deserved the truth. I pictured my panic attacks, the shame he weaponized. It made me cold, not in humorless way, but in focus. This wasn't just about money. It was about exposing a pattern of cruelty. The first folders I sent out went to the smallest people first, the ones who'd be easiest to anger into action. I wanted dominoes, not explosions. Then I did something I never expected. I sent a small, private message to Marissa with one line. You weren't the only one. Her reply came 2 minutes later and made my stomach drop. We need to talk. Meet me tonight. Bring everything. I'd planned to corner his world quietly. Instead, I just invited a new player into the room who might change everything. I sat back on the couch, phone in my hand, and felt the room tilt. When Ethan came home late that night, humming like always, I poured him a drink and smiled. He asked if I'd been working. I said, yes. Then I closed my laptop and pretended to watch the news. I'd lit the fuse. I couldn't predict the blast. But I knew one thing for certain. Once those emails opened, the rules of our house, of our marriage, would no longer apply. Marissa asked to meet at a coffee shop that smelled like burnt beans and regret. She was younger than I'd pictured, closer to my age, with tired eyes that didn't look like someone who'd send a single vindictive text and run. She slid into the booth and folded her hands like a person preparing for a long confession. I didn't send those screenshots to hurt you, she said before I even opened my mouth. I sent them because I'd already lost everything to him and I couldn't watch him do it again. She handed me a manila folder. Inside were photocopies I'd already seen, the forged loan, the escrow entry, the emails. But there was more. Bank routing numbers, a ledger that tied payments from Ethan's accounts to a shell company registered under Victor Hale's name, and a list of phone numbers that matched texts I'd found. She knew details I hadn't even told her. Why? I asked. Why tell me? She stared at me like I'd asked the wrong question. Because I'm not Marissa, she said. Not anymore. I'm an investigator. I was a victim. He seduced me, took money, promised me an escape. When I realized I wasn't the only one, I started following the money. Victor Hale isn't a lender. He's a predator. The loans are tricks to take title, to funnel cash out to offshore accounts. I've been building an AG case, but I needed a smoking gun. Internal files, victims who'd been coerced into signing. Your name appeared in documents months ago. I couldn't get in without your consent. My hands went numb. For a second I thought relief would come like rain. Instead I felt like I'd been pushed into a cold room. So you knew? You could have come sooner. She shook her head. I couldn't. I had to build a case that would stand in court. I couldn't just allege things without evidence. That's why I texted you. Because I needed your permission to act on what I already had. You're the key witness. She tapped the folder. And because I had someone on the inside who could corroborate. Someone who had started to regret what he'd done. At that, she slid another sheet across the table. It had a header I recognized, Tyler Reynolds, LLC. Under it, a short, raw transcript of a voicemail. Tyler's voice, panicked, admitting to directing funds through his company, saying he feared Victor. I read his voice in print and the coffee shop swam. I recorded him, she said. He came to me frantic. He wanted out. He gave me access to accounts. He gave me names. He thought I'd use it to help him. I used it to build a case. Her eyes were honest in a way that made me ache. Relief tried to bubble up. Tyler had helped after all. But something cold prickled the back of my neck. If he helped, why did he look like a coward at the diner? Why did he tell me he didn't mean for it to go that far? She looked away for a heartbeat and then back. Because he's scared. Because he's in too deep. Because he was promised protection. She slid a thumb drive under the folder like it was a small, dangerous thing. But there's more. The recordings I have aren't just Tyler's panic. They're Victor and Tyler talking. They planned to manage your reaction, to manufacture a breakdown so they could get you declared unstable, so they could take the house cleanly. They even discussed marrying their story with medical records. It's sick. My throat closed. I remembered the failsafe folder Ethan had kept, the files showing my panic attacks. I thought it was just cruel. Now I heard the cogs turn in my head. They'd built a legal route to wipe me out and a PR route to convince the world I was unstable when it happened. Do you have proof? I whispered. She nodded. Audio, emails, screen recordings. She tapped the drive. I can hand it to the AG, but I need you. I need you to be willing to go public. I thought about the Dropbox, the folders I'd sent to vendors, the notarized copies at my mother's house. I thought about Tyler's shaky hands in the diner. I thought about sitting at my kitchen table plotting a takedown while my husband watched TV like nothing was wrong. Then she reached into her bag and handed me a small paper with a single line typed in bold. Subpoena hearing. Thursday, 9 a.m. Franklin County Courthouse. My breath stopped. I hadn't been expecting that. She'd moved faster than I had. She'd pulled strings I didn't know how to pull. She'd turned the tiny flare I'd lit into a beacon. And one last thing, she said, voice low. When I intercepted Victor's last call, someone on the line said your full name and laughed. They think you're ours to remove. They're already accelerating the foreclosure. I looked at the paper, then at her, then at the thumb drive. I tasted copper. This was bigger than making him pay. This was a courtroom, a legal trap, a battle for my name and my home. Outside, a siren wailed like bad timing. I folded the folder, clutched the drive, and realized the game had changed into something sharper, colder, and far more dangerous than I'd imagined. The hearing wasn't until Thursday, but Ethan beat me to the courthouse. Or rather, his lawyer did. I didn't know until I got the call from the clerk that morning. Mrs. Morgan, your husband's petition has been filed, requesting financial guardianship due to mental instability. He'd used the failsafe, the panic notes, the therapy texts, the videos of me crying. I drove downtown, palms slick on the steering wheel, every light turning red like the city wanted me to see what was coming. By the time I walked into the marble lobby, I'd gone completely quiet inside. That kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's the calm before someone decides they don't care about rules anymore. Ethan was standing near the clerk's office, laughing with his lawyer like he was closing a deal. He wore his favorite charcoal suit, the one he always put on when he wanted to look respectable. When he saw me, his smile didn't falter. It sharpened. Hey, sweetheart, he said smoothly, like we were still married. You look tired. I ignored him and went straight to the clerk's desk, asking for copies of his filing. The woman hesitated but eventually handed me the papers. I skimmed the first few lines and felt sick. He'd claimed I was experiencing delusions of financial misconduct and engaging in compulsive digital behavior. He'd submitted screenshots, ones he'd staged, messages out of context, drafts of emails I'd written during panic spirals. He even claimed I'd harassed his business contacts, meaning the people I'd sent the Dropbox to. He was trying to flip the story, painting himself as the victim of an unstable wife. I looked up at him, and something in my face must have changed, because he leaned close and whispered, "You always underestimate me." Why? I asked almost too quietly. Why all of this? Why not just leave? He chuckled. Because leaving doesn't pay. Then he leaned in closer, voice low, like he was telling a joke meant only for us. You think you were special? You were insurance. A stable woman with a salary, a clean credit score, no priors, and enough trauma to keep you compliant. You were the perfect face for loans. The calm one. The believable one. He stepped back, adjusting his cufflinks. And when I was done with you, I'd cash you out. Like an investment. That word, investment, hit harder than any insult ever could. He went on, still smirking. You think you were the only one? Every woman I dated had a purpose. Marissa was the social one, she knew people. You were the legal one. The others, well, they were leverage. People trust couples. People trust wives who look tired but loyal. You were my credibility, Liv. You were my guarantee. He looked almost proud. Victor called it the perfect ecosystem. Everyone benefits. Until someone talks too much. That's when I finally understood. The panic attacks he mocked, the recordings, the slow isolation, it wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake. It was a strategy. He wanted me unstable on paper. If I ever got suspicious, I'd look unreliable. If he got caught, he'd have a trail proving I was the crazy one. He hadn't been reacting to me all those years. He'd been training me. That realization cracked something deeper than anger. It wasn't heartbreak anymore. It was horror at how carefully he'd constructed the lie, how methodically he'd replaced my reality with his. He walked away with that smug half-grin, calling over his shoulder, "I'll see you in court." And for the first time in our entire marriage, I smiled back. Small, almost polite, because he didn't know what was coming. Marissa's evidence, Tyler's confession, the loan trail, the forged signature, and my Dropbox, the one that had already started circulating. Slowly, quietly, unstoppably. By Thursday morning, the story wouldn't belong to him anymore. Thursday came gray and wet, that kind of Midwestern morning where the sky looks bruised. I walked into the courthouse alone. No makeup, hair tied back, folder under my arm. Ethan and his lawyer were already there, smug, confident, whispering like men who thought they'd already won. They didn't know I'd been working all night. I'd given everything, the contracts, Tyler's voicemail, Marissa's thumb drive, to the state investigator attached to her case. He hadn't promised me anything except this. Show up, tell the truth. We'll handle the rest. The hearing started at 9. Ethan's lawyer went first, painting the same picture Ethan always had. Poor husband, hardworking provider, trapped with a fragile wife. He even played one of the audio clips. Me crying during a panic attack, and looked toward the judge like it was proof of instability. I just sat there, calm. When it was my turn, I stood up, pulled out a USB drive, and handed it to the clerk. "These are the original files from my husband's business," I said. "And these," I held up the notarized pages, "are contracts bearing my forged signature. I also have audio recordings that show this was premeditated fraud involving multiple victims." The judge paused. Ethan's lawyer tried to object, but the investigator stepped forward from the back of the room. Marissa right behind him, in a navy suit instead of the worn hoodie I'd first met her in. "Your Honor," he said, "we'd like to submit supporting evidence gathered during an ongoing criminal investigation into Mr. Morgan's financial dealings." Ethan turned pale. The next few minutes blurred together. Questions? Exhibits? Ethan's lawyer stammering. The investigator calmly laying out the chain of transactions that tied Ethan, Tyler, and Victor together. Every document I'd pulled, every file I'd sent, every small careful step. It all landed on the record, right there under fluorescent lights and official letterhead. Then they played the recording. Ethan's voice, crystal clear. "She'll never leave. I could drain her dry and she'd still think we're a team." The judge's pen stopped moving. Ethan's lawyer tried to whisper something, but Ethan just sat there staring at the floor, his confidence melting off him in slow, sticky layers. The petition for guardianship was dismissed immediately. Then the investigator handed him a folded piece of paper, a subpoena, his name at the top. They took him out the side door within 20 minutes. I didn't follow. I didn't gloat. I just stood there while the courtroom emptied, hands shaking but steady enough to pack up my folder. By the next morning, the Dropbox link was everywhere. Anonymous tips had gone to local news outlets, the creditors, even his parents. Tyler turned himself in. Victor fled the state, but warrants went out within days. Ethan tried calling once from county holding. I didn't answer. Marissa called later, though. She said, "You did more than you realize. You started the domino." Maybe she was right. I didn't feel victorious. Just clean. I sold the house, cleared every debt tied to his name, and moved to a small place outside Cincinnati. I don't check social media much anymore, but sometimes I see his name pop up in articles about small business scams or financial exploitation cases. He'll be a cautionary tale before he's forgotten. Some nights, I still hear his voice in my head. That smug line, "You were my financial plan." But now it's almost funny because in the end, I turned out to be his bankruptcy. The last thing I did before deleting the Dropbox for good was rename the main folder one final time. Bet lost, final balance, paid in full. Then I closed the laptop, took a long breath, and for the first time in years, didn't feel afraid of my own silence.